It happened that in the olden times there was a girl named Gretel who liked nothing better than to eat. So she worked as a cook. But oftentimes she had to be very clever to explain what happened to all the food she had eaten. In the old country, they tell this story of Clever Gretel. One day, Gretel's master came to the kitchen and said,
"Gretel, for dinner we are having tonight a guest. And you will be so kind as to cook for us 2 chickens, as nice as you can."
And Clever Gretel said,
"Yeah, master. I will make them so good they will melt in your mouth altogether."
So Gretel prepared the chickens and put them over the fire to roast. And soon they were getting nicely browned. And Gretel called,
"Master, the time to eat the chickens is almost now already, because after in a few minutes they will be cooked so much and they will not taste well together all in your mouth." And the master said, "Ach, the guest is late. I myself will run out and get him."
And away he went out the door. Now, sitting alone by the fire and basting the chickens with butter, Gretel began to get extremely hungry.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, what wonderful chickens. Gee, I never saw such beautiful chickens in my whole life. Look at the way they look. I cannot stand to look at them altogether. Oh, what lovely chickens. Phew. It's a shame nobody should taste them before they cook too long and spoil the whole juiciness from them. And what if the master can't find the guest even?
And deciding that, she cut off a chicken wing and quickly ate it. Then she turned the chicken to baste it some more.
I really don't know what is the matter. It doesn't look right to me. It's what we say here, cockeyed. It's all lopsided.
And she cut off the other wing and ate that one quickly as well. But now Gretel had to turn the chicken again. And as she ladled more butter on the golden skin, she said hungrily,
"Oh, so juicy, so juicy. And by the time my master returns, it may be drier than a bone. And that wouldn't be right for the chicken."
So she ate the whole chicken. While she was still smacking her lips and licking her fingers, she began to take pity on the second chicken, naturally.
And she said, "Well, what is right for one is right also for the other one. Where one is, there should be the other be too, one where that one is."
And so she seized the other chicken and ate every single bit of it. As she finished the second chicken, the master came hurrying in.
"Gretel," he said, "the guest will be here in just one moment, and I will go and make sharp the knife for carving all the chickens right here."
At that very moment, the guest knocked at the door. And Clever Gretel hurried to open it, and before he could even step inside, she whispered, "Run away. Run away, because something terrible is happening what they are planning inside. Do you know what is happening inside? My master is planning to cut off your ears. Listen, do you hear? He makes sharp the whole knife to cut off your ears, both of them ears." Well, you can well imagine how this frightened the guest. He pulled his cap down over his precious ears and fled with his coattails streaming out behind him. Then Gretel hastened to the dining room and said to her master,
"Well, master, a fine kind of guest you invited here to dinner."
"What do you mean?" he asked.
"Well, he just grabs the chickens that I cooked so nicely, worked so hard, and is now running away with them." "What?" bellowed the master. "With both of them? With my chicken also?"
And with his carving knife still clutched in his hand, he rushed into the street shouting wildly,
Not both, just one! Just one!
But the frightened guest only ran faster because, of course, he thought the master was asking for just one ear. And Clever Gretel stood in the doorway saying, my, my. And she smoothed her apron and smiled and went back to the kitchen to look for some dessert. Long ago, in another land 1,000 miles away, a brother and sister went to the woods to play. And as they played, they came upon an old enchanted well, all overgrown with vines and moss. And so, of course, they fell. The well was deep, the sides were steep, and down they dropped, until they reached the bottom, and into the water plopped. Now here there lived a Nixie, a lazy water elf, who laughed and said, "You'll do the work I used to do myself." She gave the girl some tangled flax and made her sit and spin it, and carry water in a can that had no bottom in it. She gave the boy a heavy axe, as dull as it could be, and made him chop her kindling from the very hardest tree. She fed them sour dumplings, but only one a day, and the boy said to his sister, "We'll have to run away. Let's leave on Sunday morning, when the Nixie goes to church. Then we'll be gone an hour before she starts to search." And so they ran away. And of course the Nixie was furious when she returned, and she angrily set out to look for them. From afar she caught sight of the runaway two, and she took up the chase as a Nixie can do, by taking great strides that covered great stretches, while shrieking, "Come back here, you ungrateful wretches!" But the girl dropped a brush which had magical bristles that surrounded the Nixie with acres of thistles, and the boy dropped a comb that was magical too, and its teeth became thorns. But the Nixie came through. Then the sister dropped a mirror, the most magical of all, and it grew into a mountain range, so shiny, smooth, and tall, and so slippery that the Nixie couldn't climb the glassy side, for she slipped each time she tried to take her giant Nixie stride. Then the mountains grew much steeper, really quite remarkably, and for every forward step she took, the Nixie slid back 3. So the children escaped. And the Nixie? Well, why, the more she tried to climb, the more she slipped and slid and fell, and finally went tumbling down and landed in her well. One night, a little old woman gathered together a handful of beans for dinner. To make the coals in her fireplace burn brightly, she tossed a bundle of straw on them. Then she put the beans in a pot to simmer. But one of the beans dropped out of her hand, one of the straws slid out of the bundle, and one of the coals rolled out of the fire. And all 3 lay together on the hearth, watching sadly while their comrades cooked. Said the straw in a reedy voice,
It's pleasant to escape the flames, but as you fellas saw, my relatives went up in smoke, and I'm the, well, last straw.
And the bean bubbled,
Well, as for me, I'd glad to be in this delightful spot, or here or there or anywhere before I go to pot.
And the coal hissed,
So nice to meet you, gentlemen. Most pleasant and all that. But don't you think that we could find a cooler place to chat?
They all agreed, and the 3 of them went off together. By and by they came to a little brook that had no bridge, and sputtered the coal.
I'd like to roam the world with you, but there is just no doubt. If I go into that water, it will promptly put me out.
And the bean added,
And I don't dare to get all wet by going in the brook. For as you know, we beans are soaked before we set to cook. But the straw said eagerly,
Fear not, O Bean, and you, friend Cole. There is a way, you see. I'll stretch myself from shore to shore, and you can cross on me.
And the straw stretched himself across the stream, just like a tiny bridge. The coal was the first to use the straw bridge. He started out bravely enough, but halfway over he looked down at the water, shuddered, and stopped. And at the place where he stood, the poor straw smoldered, smoked, and broke in half. And down went the straw and coal into the water. Safe on shore, the bean watched sadly and said,
A straw and coal will never mix, no matter how they try. Blah, blah, blah. Like fire and ice, or cats and mice, or hungry folks and I. That's rather funny, he thought, and laughed. Hungry folks and I. That's very funny.
In fact, he laughed so hard that he split his sides. But luckily, at that very moment, a tailor happened to be passing by. And he ran over just in time and sewed the bean back together again. But in his haste, he used black thread. And to this day, all beans have black seams down their sides. Once upon a time, there was a poor widow who had 2 daughters, and she called them Snow White and Rose Red, because they were just like the flowers that bloomed on 2 rose bushes that stood in front of their little cottage. Now Snow White and Rose Red were as good as they were beautiful, and so gentle that all the small animals who lived in the forest were their friends. One winter evening, there was a knock at the cottage door.
Open the door, Rose Red, said the mother. Perhaps that's a traveler
Who needs shelter from the snow. So Rose Red opened the door, and there stood a great black bear.
Mother, Rose Red cried out in fear.
But the bear said, Don't be afraid. I won't harm you. I'm simply half frozen, and I would like to come in and get warm.
Poor bear, said the mother.
Come in and lie down by the fire, but be careful not to burn your coat. Come, Snow White and Rose Red. The bear won't hurt us. So shyly the girls came near.
How do you do, sir, said Snow White. May I help you with your coat?
And she took a broom and swept the snow from the bear's fur. You're very kind to an old bear, he said, and stretched out in front of the fire, growled comfortably, and went to sleep. The next night the bear was back again, and the next, and the next, and soon he was part of the family. But at last spring came, and one morning the bear said, Now I must leave. It is time to go into the woods and guard my treasure. Once the sun has warmed the earth, the dwarfs come up out of their holes and steal gold and jewels and anything else they can find. So Snow White and Rose Red said goodbye very sadly, and the bear went away, deep into the forest. One day, soon afterwards, the girls were out in the woods, and while they were there, they saw a tiny man with an old, wrinkled face and a beard that was longer than his whole body. The tip of his beard was caught under a fallen tree, and he was hopping and jumping in rage. Stop standing there stupidly staring, sputtered the little man. Do something, you skinny, scrawny, scraggly, skin and skeleton scarecrows. "Of course," said Rose Red politely. "We'll try to pull you free." And they tugged as hard as they could. But the beard was caught too tightly, and they couldn't get him free.
"Oh, you feeble-fingered, fat-headed, fumbling females," roared the little man. "You wicked, weak-witted woodworms! Can't you think of anything better?"
"Don't be impatient," said Snow White gently. "I have thought of something better." And pulling her scissors out of her pocket, she snipped off the end of his beard. Well, the instant he was free, he grabbed a sack of gold that he had set beside the tree and marched away without one single word of thanks. A few days later, Snow White and Rose Red went out to catch some fish. "There's the dwarf," said Snow White as they approached the pond. "There he is." And it was. And again, he was leaping about wildly. "If you're not careful," Rose Red called, "you'll fall in and get soaked."
"Careful!" screeched the little man. "Be careful! Oh, you big-bodied, beetle-browed, bird-brained, blind baboon! Can't you see that a fish has caught my beard and is trying to pull me in?"
"Oh, dear," said Snow White, reaching for her scissors. "I guess I'll just have to..." And she snipped off another tiny piece of beard and freed the dwarf.
"Why, you bumbling, beard-butchering barber! Wasn't it enough to cut off the end of my beard without taking the middle part too?"
And as he said that, he snatched up a bag of pearls and stamped away. Just then the girls heard a great flapping of wings, and ahead of them a giant eagle swooped down and seized the dwarf. "Oh, we must save him," Rose Red cried. And they grabbed the little man and held him tight, beating at the bird with their fists until at last he gave up and flew away. "Oh, dear," said Snow White. "That was almost the end of you."
Why, you've torn my best coat, and that's almost as bad, you raggedy, rascally, rose-red wretch."
Suddenly, there was a low growl, and a great black bear appeared. The dwarf was terrified.
"Don't eat me, bear. I'm just a tiny, tasteless, tough old dwarf. Take these lovely little ladies instead."
But the bear gave the dwarf a single swat with his paw, and the little man sailed way over the pond and out of sight. And where he had stood lay a glittering heap of gold and jewels. The girls started to run away, but the bear called after them, "Stop, Snow White and Rose Red. Don't be afraid." "Why, it's our bear," said Snow White, and she ran to him and kissed him. And the heap of jewels flowed over the bear, and the rough coat fell away, and the bear became a handsome prince. "I've been under the spell of the wicked dwarf," he said, "but you kissed me and set me free. But if you will not marry me, Snow White, I would rather be a bear again." But Snow White did marry the prince, and Rose Red married his brother, and the mother came to live with them all. And the rose trees that had stood before the cottage now stood before the palace, and forever bloomed with beautiful flowers, Snow White and Rose Red. There was once a donkey who had spent all of his life carrying corn sacks to the mill for his master. But now he was getting old, and every sack seemed heavier, and every day seemed longer. I really should find some other profession, he thought. But how else could I possibly make a living? My only other talent is my voice. Aha, that's it. Music. I will go to Bremen and become the town musician. So he set out for Bremen. And he had been walking for just a little while when he saw an old hound lying in the road, gasping and panting. "Hello, old fellow," he said. "Why are you breathing so hard?"
"I've been running," said the hound. Running away, that is. I'm too old and weak to hunt, and my master doesn't want me anymore. And how am I ever going to earn my bread and bones?"
"Well, now, I happen to have an answer to that problem," said the donkey. "Why not come with me? I'm going to Bremen to be the town musician. I will play the lute and bray. And I can beat the drum and bay."
Not bad.
"I will go with you." So the two musicians went on toward Bremen. They hadn't been long on the road when they met a cat sitting on the path. And his face was as long as a rainy week, and his whiskers were drooping and trembling. There, old shaver," said the donkey. "Don't cry. Nothing can be that bad."
"Oh, can't it, though?" wailed the cat. "Meow. I used to be the best mouse catcher in the country, but now I'm too old and can only sit by the fire. What am I to do? Where am I to go?"
"Come with us to Bremen," said the donkey. "You're a born serenader, and we'll make a rousing trio."
"Who, me? Me? Meow?"
Well, perhaps it would work. Let's try it. So the trio continued on toward Bremen. Soon the animals came to a farmyard, and on the gate sat a rooster, crowing with all his might. "Now that," said the donkey, "is a truly magnificent crow."
"I am singing my heart out," said the rooster, "while I still can. I have just heard the farmer's wife say that tomorrow I go into the soup kettle. This is my last crow, but it will be my best."
"How fine it is to meet a musician who takes pride in his work," said the donkey. "But why stay here and make soup when you can come with us and make music?" Happily, the rooster agreed, and the four friends went on together toward Bremen. When evening came, they decided to stop and look for a place to spend the night. The rooster flew to the top of a tree, and in a moment called down, "There's a light up ahead." They soon saw that the light came from a window in a house. The donkey tiptoed up to it and looked in.
"What do you see?" asked the rooster.
"What do I see? I see a room filled with riches, a table covered with good things to eat, and sitting at the table, a band of robbers. Well, perhaps we can earn our supper here. Let us think." So the musicians worked out a plan. The donkey went back to the window and put his 4 feet up on the sill. The hound jumped up on the donkey's back, and the cat leaped up on the dog, and the rooster perched on the cat's head. Then the donkey rapped the sill with his hoof. At the very first note of the town musicians of Bremen, the robbers screamed in fright, leaped to their feet, and ran out into the forest. The 4 minstrels agreed that their performance had certainly earned them some supper, so they went into the house, sat down at the table, and ate as if they might never see another meal. Then they carefully put out the light, and each found the sleeping place that suited him best. The donkey stretched out on some straw in the backyard, the hound curled up behind the door, the cat lay on the hearth, and the rooster flew to the rafters of the roof, and soon they were all sound asleep. Meanwhile, The robbers were huddled out in the forest, but when it was past midnight, they crept in closer to the house.
"We were foolish to be so frightened," said the leader. "We can't leave our house and our treasures just because we heard a noise. No matter how horrible it was, we can't leave our house."
And he bravely ordered one of his men to go back and investigate. The robber tiptoed back to the house and slid in the front door. It was dark and silent inside. By the hearth, he saw what he thought were 2 live coals, and quietly he reached over to light them. But suddenly, the coals were the glistening eyes of the cat, who flew into the robber's face, spitting and scratching. "Help!" cried the robber, and ran for the back door, but the hound leaped up and bit his leg. "Help! Help!" he cried again, and ran out into the yard, but here the donkey gave him a hearty kick, and the rooster, jumping up and down in the rafters, crowed at the top of his lungs. The robber ran back to his leader as fast as he could.
"There's a dreadful witch sitting on the hearth," he said, "and she spat at me and scratched me, and by the door stands a man with a knife, and he stabbed me, and in the yard lies a black monster, and he beat me with a club, and on the roof is the judge, and he roared, 'Caught the rascal, did you? We must never, never go back again.'"
And they never did. But the house suited the 4 musicians so well that they never left it, not even to go to Bremen. And they lived there happily for all the rest of their lives. Once in the old country, a long, long time ago, a hungry fox came to a meadow in which there sat a flock of fine, fat geese. "How nice," he said. "I can see that I have arrived just in time for dinner. And you're all sitting together so neatly that I can eat you one after another without even getting up between courses. Thank you very much for your courtesy." But one of the geese stepped forward and said, "As everybody knows, Mr. Fox, geese are slow and stupid, and foxes are quick and smart. So naturally we couldn't hope to escape you. But perhaps you would grant us just one favor." "And that is?" asked the fox. "Before you eat us, let us say our prayers."
"Very well," said the fox. "That seems reasonable enough. Pray away. I'll wait till you're done."
So the first goose began to pray. She prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And before she ever finished, the second goose began to pray. And she prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And then the third began, and then the fourth. And soon all the geese were praying, one by one, and in duets, and in trios, and all together in a great chorus. And then, one by one again. When the geese have finished praying, I'll tell you the rest of the story. But until then, just like the fox, we'll simply have to wait. Once in a faraway land, there was a very, very poor man who had a very beautiful daughter. Now, it happened one day that he met the king, and he wanted to make himself seem rather important. "I," he said grandly, "have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." "How interesting," said the king. "Bring her to my palace, and I will put her to the test." When the girl was brought to him, he took her into a room full of straw, gave her a spinning wheel, and said, If by tomorrow morning you have not spun this straw into gold, you must die. Then he locked the door and left her in the room, all alone.
Oh, dear, cried the girl. Whatever shall I do?
Because, of course, she had no idea at all how to spin straw into gold. But suddenly, the door opened, and in stepped a little man.
Good evening, girl, he said. Why are you crying so? Alas, I have to spin this straw into gold, and I don't know how to do it. What will you give me if I do it for you? Asked the little man. I am very poor, she wept, and I have nothing of value to give you. Well then, said the little man, will you promise to give me your first child if you should become queen? Queen, thought the girl. Me? I'll never become queen.
So she promised, and the little man sat himself in front of the wheel with a handful of straw. The straw became gold. He worked until daybreak, and by then all the straw was spun, and the room was full of gold. Early in the morning, the king came, and when he saw the gold, he could hardly believe his eyes. This is only a poor man's daughter, he thought, but where can I find a richer bride? And he said to the girl, you shall be my queen. So they were married, and a year later they had a beautiful child. When the young queen's baby was exactly 1 week old, the strange little man suddenly appeared in her room.
Now, he said, you must give me what you promised.
Oh, no. Anything else, cried the queen. Take all my riches, but leave me my child.
And she wept and moaned and begged, and finally he said,
very well. I will give you 3 days. If in that time you can find out my name, you may keep your baby.
During the night, the queen lay awake, trying to remember all the names she had ever heard. And when the little man came the next day, she began.
Jonathan, Joseph, Jeremiah, Timothy, Titus, Obadiah, William Henry, Walter, Sim, Reuben, Rufus, Solomon, Jim, Nathaniel, Daniel, Abraham, Roderick, Frederick, Peter, Sam, Casper, Jasper, Nicholas, Pat, Christopher, Jack, Jehoshaphat.
No. At last she had said all the names she knew, and the little man laughed and went away. That night, the queen sent a messenger out to discover every unusual name that anyone in the countryside knew of, and the next day she had another long list.
Xavier, Xerxes, Zittleby, Zorch.
But the little man said, no.
And again he went away. And again the queen sent her messenger out. But when he came back on the last morning, he said, not another name have I been able to find, Your Majesty.
Oh, no, she wept, no.
But I did see something strange, said the messenger. Far out at the edge of the forest, I saw a little house, and in front of it, a bonfire was burning. And in front of the fire, a strange little man hopping on one foot and singing,
today I brew, tomorrow I bake, and then the young queen's child I'll take. Oh, she'll lose the guessing game, for Rumpelstiltskin is my name.
Oh, thank you, cried the queen.
Soon afterwards, the little man appeared.
Now, Your Majesty, he thundered, what is my name?
The Queen smiled.
Perhaps, Tom?
No.
Maybe Dick?
No.
Well, then, said Her Majesty, there's nothing left but Rumpelstiltskin.
You guessed it, you guessed it, shrieked the little wren. I won't have it, I won't stand for it. And he stamped his right foot into the ground so hard that he sank up to his waist. Then he stamped his left leg so hard that he disappeared completely.
And Rumpelstiltskin was never seen again. There was once a very good little girl who lived alone with her mother. They were really quite poor, and a time came when they had nothing to eat. So the little girl went into the forest to gather berries, and there she met an old woman who said,
Why are you here in the woods alone?
and the little girl said, I'm gathering berries so that my mother and I will have something to eat. We are very poor and have nothing else. The old woman gave the little girl a tiny magic pot, and it would cook good sweet porridge whenever the girl said, Cook your porridge, little pot. Cook your porridge sweet and hot. And when she said, Stop, little pot, your cooking is done, there's quite enough porridge for everyone. And then the little pot would stop cooking until it was asked to cook again. And so the girl and her mother were never hungry because they ate sweet porridge whenever they chose. Then once, when the girl went away on a visit, the mother wanted to eat. Cook your porridge, little pot, she said. Cook your porridge, sweet and hot. And the little pot hissed and whistled merrily and bubbled with good, sweet porridge. And the mother ate until she could eat no more. And then she wanted the pot to stop cooking, but she didn't quite know the words. Stop, pot, she commanded. But the little pot hissed and whistled merrily and kept bubbling with good, sweet porridge. Over the edge and onto the table flowed the porridge. You foolish pot, stop cooking. Over the table and across the floor flowed the porridge. Then she tried to rhyme. Stop cooking, pot, stop cooking, I say, or you'll cook all your magical porridge away. But the little pot just hissed and whistled merrily and bubbled over with good, sweet porridge. It kept cooking, and sweet porridge rolled out the door and down the street just as if it wanted to satisfy the hunger of the whole world. The pot hissed and whistled and cooked, and soon the sweet porridge rolled into the village. Nobody knew how to stop it, and everybody ran away. Porridge began to cover everything. Then at last, when only one house remained, the little girl came home and said, Stop, little pot. Your cooking is done. There's quite enough porridge for everyone. And the little pot whistled and hissed and sighed and stopped cooking. And anybody who wanted to return to the village had to eat his way through good, sweet porridge.